Hello friends, we come back to the discussion on Robert Lynd, the essayist from England, and he had his roots in Ireland, and his biography actually makes us conscious about his strong points, and his strong point is that he's a familiar figure in the neighborhood, and he would talk to people as if he's talking to himself. So with that kind of impression about the writer, we go on to the next part of the discussion to find out how the whole attitude that he had borrowed from, he had inherited from his background, also translated into the actual practice of the time. So over to you again, Professor Bajaj, and please begin.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So what I'll do right now is I've already placed Robert Lynd in the context. I'm going to take up the essay that, at least 2 essays, time permitting, from his works. One of them is titled On Not Being a Philosopher. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, that Robert Lynd used the humorous tone, witty style, at the same time a very chatty sort of essays that he wrote. Now, look at the the way he opens this sort of discussion, and on the title itself, which is titled "On Not Being a Philosopher," and the subtitle of this is Epictetus and the Average Man. Now, it was published in his collection It's a Fine World, 1930. So this is the pre-Second World War, but he is just going over this entire question of what is philosophy. Again, what you notice in 20th century essay form or essays is that there is a sense of a kind of a self-awareness of one's own incapacities or incapabilities and acceptance of it. As you see in a lot of literature of the early 20th century, the shrunken human being or the weak or the frail human being is what the writers really accept. Think of T.S. Eliot, for instance. So it's the same kind of note, but I think it's a kind of a weighing in of the options that he has between being a philosopher and being an average man, right? So he says, when he says he's talking about this Stoic philosopher, right? He mentions Epictetus in the essay, and the average man. He says, I'm the average man, and I cannot be the Stoic philosopher that I read about, even when this Stoic philosopher really influences me and I think really high of him, and I think he's, I look up to him, like all of us think that that's the right way of life. And yet he says, I cannot be that person. Now, let me take up some quotes in order for you to understand. Now, what he says, he begins with his essay with, and I quote, I have no time or energy for the laborious quest of philosophy. Yeah, I wish the philosophers to perform the laborious quest, and at the end of it, to feed me with the fruits of their labors. Just as I get eggs from the farmer, apples from the fruit grower, medicines from the chemist, so do I expect the philosopher to provide me with wisdoms at the cost of a few shillings. Unquote. What do you think of this?
He's taking these ordinary details, right, and he's putting a lot of meaning into them, and
right,
he seems to be very simple, but I think, as you said earlier also, his concerns are serious.
Yeah.
His concerns are of those ordinary people, who keep themselves away from philosophy, and yet they pursue their job very, very, very well.
Yeah. No, what I also felt was that this kind of very interesting, inventive, ingenious sort of a mind, creative sort of liberties that he says that, just as I go and I give some few shillings and buy eggs.
Yes.
Yeah. So I should go to a book, and the philosopher should do all the thing for me and then provide me at the end with the fruits of his labor. Just as I don't go to prepare I don't grow a fruit. I just go to the market and buy the fruit that is grown by somebody else.
Just see how the word fruit, is explained further.
Right.
It's the fruit of philosophy,
yes,
lessons to
right,
the actual fruits that's supposed
right,
to be taken to the market.
Absolutely, which is why I said very interesting analogies
yes,
from life,
yes,
and this
yes,
is what makes it very entertaining, that just as you go to the market and pick up the fruits and you don't grow the fruits, right? So you go to the book and you want to get the fruit of the philosophy without really going through the laborious task of finding the truth or finding wisdom or finding out the truth of life. He says, I want to just go to the book and let the philosopher give me the...
No, he's very naughty,
yes,
his references.
Yeah, very tongue-in-cheek here.
Yes.
And then he says, I quote, I read them, I hoped, was to become wise by reading. I had hoped I would become wise by reading, but I did not become wise. I agreed with them while I read them, but when I had finished reading, I was still much the same man as I had been before.
Imagine, literal and metaphorical, they are so very well brought out.
Right.
Yes,
In the
yes.
sense that he says that,
I'm the same man, imagine.
I'm the same man. He says, while I'm reading them,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
a changed person. But the moment I keep the book away, I am the same man as I was before, right?
Absolutely.
And that means I have to take care of my laundry. I have to take care of other things. I'm very much with the world in that sense, and for that brief moment I become wise, but then he says that I agreed with them while I read them, but when I had finished reading, I was still the same man as I had been before. And then he says, even so, I have never lost faith in books.
Just see
The dialectical nature of
and
the
movement
whole-
which is to and fro.
Yeah, that books are important, philosophy is important. I never lose faith. I go to them to get wisdom. I do get wisdom, but I don't get wisdom. I leave the book aside and I'm again the average man. So, how he's going in various directions at the same time. And then he says, I have never lost faith in books, believing that somewhere one exists from which one can absorb philosophy and strength of character while sitting smoking in an armchair.
Imagine. And strength of character is such a serious word.
Right.
And he's just using it in order to compare it with something which appears to be rather simple.
Yeah, but very interesting that he says, I could just sit in an armchair and absorb all philosophy and strength of character by just going into the book. There has to be that book. So there is this faith, he says, that I've never lost in books. But what he is also doing in this essay is that he is conveying the inability to lead a stoic life as those great philosophers, like Epictetus.
He wants to enjoy life. He
Yeah.
wants to tell people that he's relaxed.
Right, right.
And that there's
So,
nothing.
even though he
good-
says they look like high ideals and you would you think that's the right way, you cannot follow that path, right? And he says, I quote, death, pain and poverty are to me very real evils.
Yes.
Yes. They are not some things that, so when he's referring to Epictetus here, he refers to how, he talked about showing indifference to pain, to death, indifference to if somebody does bad to you, then you should remain indifferent. If you don't have food to eat, then you should remain indifferent to poverty and other things. He says, but I cannot be. These are very real things to me and these are very real evils, except when I am in the armchair reading a book by a philosopher, right?
So it starts with a joke, end with a joke, and in
But
the
then-
middle are serious concerns.
Yeah, that one is a material being and the human being in itself is a material being, and therefore he emphasizes this materiality of life, that we are often, you want to be like this stoic philosopher, but you cannot be because these things bother you. He says that somebody's ill behavior or inadequate things, they bother you. So in a way, he goes in both the directions.
No, and I can see the strategy. He wants to ridicule Stoicism, but he
Right.
doesn't want to hurt anyone.
Right.
But he makes his point very clear.
Yeah,
very
he wants to ridicule it, but at the same time he says, oh, I'm fascinated by it.
Yes, yes.
So, that he's using this
That's
tongue-in-cheek method.
that's being very harsh.
Yes, and that's probably the best way of criticizing, because he's constantly suggesting that I'm fascinated by it and I admire all these philosophers. In fact, I am a philosopher when I'm reading them, but when I'm not reading them, then I'm an average man.
And I come back to myself.
Yeah, and I'm an average man who's bothered by things that are taking place around
And
oneself.
I'm no longer scathed.
So also in a way, I think it brings up the debate about the body and the spirit, that who are you? Are you more body than spirit? Are you more spirit than body? Now all these Stoic philosophers ask you to negate the body and negate the physical experience.
That's English essay at its best.
Yes.
This kind of movement went forth.
But he doesn't talk about body or spirit anywhere. What he talks about is, when I go to a restaurant and this person doesn't get what I want to eat, then I get irritated. So he takes the most trivial example, but then comments on it vis-a-vis. The comment is on a larger issue, that is the body and the spirit.
He's
that
a
there is
very
the
fine
materiality.
communicator. The
Right.
way he can communicate very difficult is so
Yes,
well.
communicate through the trivialities of
Yes,
life,
yes.
And then again, let me take another quote from the same essay. He says, though I am the staunchest possible admirer of Socrates, Pliny and people of that sort, sound though I am as an armchair philosopher, at a crisis I find that both the spirit and the flesh are weak.
Yes, yes.
That I am a weak person. Again, it also ties very well with the acceptance of frailty or human beings' frailty, which was something that the 20th century was coming to terms with. That you are no more this grand heroic Renaissance man or of the early century, that you are frail and you are weak and that you break down under crisis, and it's okay to cry and to break down under crisis. This is I think a lot about the early 20th century, that you don't have to be a kind of a macho man, or you don't have to be strong. You are not God's gift. You are an ordinary person and you are frail. So I think that also is at the background, I think, working here. So at a crisis, he says, I find that both the spirit and the flesh are weak. Even in the small things of life, I cannot comport myself like a philosopher of the school of Epictetus. Right. So this is something, what he feels is what human beings are and where they stand. He says about Epictetus, he says, when he advises us to be patient, even under the most atrocious service at our meals, he commends a spiritual attitude of which my nature is incapable.
Imagine.
Yes.
Once again.
He says that again, that he says that there is a kind of an expectant, that one needs to have a high level of spirituality and to be able to remain indifferent to all these things. But he says that is not possible, right? And he finally closes with something like this as a kind of an insight, in fact, when he says that when the world is at peace, we hold the paradoxical belief that the philosophers were wise men, but that we should be fools to imitate them. We believe that while philosophers are worth reading, material things are worth bothering about. Unquote. So, you can see, so philosophy as abstract sort of an idea, and material things or reality is something that you constantly need to deal with in your everyday life. So, he says that if today, it's all very well when you read these Socrates and you read Epictetus and you feel that, oh my God, they were such great men who could show such stoicism and they could remain immune to death and they could just they were absolutely indifferent. All this looks very fancy, but he says if your loved one, if your best friend were doing something like that, you would think that person to be insane. You would not want that person to leave everything and remain indifferent to the life one leads. He says you would call that person insane. So he says there is ever a distance between the philosopher that you have read and the life that you lead, and material things will constantly come up in the way of you being able to lead the life of wise men, so to speak.
He is suggesting, that philosophy is very pompous and that it doesn't appeal to us. But then it doesn't say it in that.
No, he says it appeals to us only as an abstraction or as an idea. But its application in real life is almost something which will make us inhuman. Right? And to remain human, you must bother about material things. So, which is why the title Epictetus and the Average Man, right? The philosopher, the saint, stoic philosopher and the average man. So, I think between the two, he says, I'm okay being the average man, and even though I might admire these people, I should not imitate their
20th
footsteps.
century is the century of the masses, common
Right.
masses. It's not like the 18th or
also
other centuries.
the acceptance that you don't have to walk that difficult great path like these philosophers, and that it's okay to have your own little life and to bother about the little life that you lead. So it can be misinterpreted as a kind of something that is that he's probably vouching for triviality or something, but that's not the case. He's actually suggesting.
He is aware of the depths, that philosophy sometimes might create, but then he wants to remain himself.
Yeah. Also self-critical in that sense.
Yes.
He's able to see. He's able to humorously look at his own. Idiosyncrasies and at the same time
and weaknesses. Infirmities. Yes.
So he's able to see all of those, and I think that's something which by extension he's able to talk to all those people who probably think that they will lead a high grand life and high ideals and morals and virtues, but they're not able to. So I think that is one thing which really struck me as important in this essay.
It is. I think that's the purpose of writing, in literature. that you should always empathize with the ordinary masses.
Right. And like A.G. Gardner, he also wrote another essay on the pleasures of ignorance. All these writers seem to talk about the pleasures of ignorance, but at the same time suggesting that all of us are ignorant. So there is a sense of a deeper understanding of our own ignorance insofar as, their works are concerned.
So you see a kind of nearness between A.G. Gardner and
Robert Lynd. They very much form that kind of whole. Again, in another book of his, and I'll just briefly deal with this. It's titled Life's Little Oddities. Yeah. Now, this is the title of the book. It came out in 1941. Most of the essays deal with the warriors. So, a lot of these essays basically. Some of the titles from this collection, you'll get a sense of what his works are, and you can go back and read. Like, one of the titles is Getting One's Hair Cut. That's one of the titles. The other is On Being a Bore. Right? The third is On Buying a Lemon. Or More Taxes Please. Yeah, these are some of the
and the titles themselves suggest what is there in them.
In them. Yeah, so it's very interesting if you just go
very
over
graphic.
Yes, very. This person is very pictorial in his depictions, and he actually captures the mood through images. He's actually more of a literary person because he creates characters, he gives dialogues to these characters, they talk, and he's only merely observing them and probably adding one or two, commenting on them maybe at the end or somewhere in the middle, and that also very incomplete. So if you read, for instance, his this little essay, Getting One's Hair Cut, this particular essay, it's written in the background, against the background of the warriors, and he says, let me quote it, you'll probably be able to understand it better. He says, and I quote, "As I was sipping what might be called my 11 essays, the local siren went on. 'There he goes,' said the barmaid with a laugh, and she called through a doorway to someone invisible. 'Mother, did you hear him?' It was the first time I had heard a siren referred to as a member of the male sex." Right? Unquote. Now, this is how he begins his essay. Again, you're able to see the barmaid who's talking to her mother, somebody invisible, and then adding his own comment in parentheses where he says it was the first time. Basically, what's happened is that the sirens are going on during the warriors, and they are being alerted that there'll be bombing here in this region. So, and in a way, what is shocking about these essays, this one, and there's another one of on the similar lines, which is No Fear. Now, in such essays, you find that bombing and life seems to be going in a very matter-of-fact way. Like, it's not something tragic, it's become a way of life for people at the time. Like, people are coming to the barber's place, people are getting their haircuts, people are getting them their beards trimmed or shaved, etc. And here is the woman who's serving food, hotel is going on. People are going about their daily business every day.
Now that you describe it so well, I believe that there is a lot of similarity between him and Charlie Chaplin, because the ordinary masses and copying them and then creating kind of laughter in times which are very distressed.
Very distressed. So the English essay does that actually. Yes. It is meant to offer this kind of reprieve or relief to the people at the time. But what is shocking is that bombs are being there are bombs taking place in the essay No Fear. This person, there is an ordinary person who tried to get rid of a bomb, and he is fined by the local magistrate. So the essay says that I would think this person is very fearless and all of that, but the magistrate says that the average ordinary amateur should not touch a bomb. But this person actually did away with the bomb, took the bomb away and threw it behind the churchyard.
This is so Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, and he's been fined by the magistrate that how dare you touch something that you were not supposed to touch.
The Great Dictator, that film comes to mind. The dictator plays with a ball and it turns out to be a bomb.
Right, so that's what it is. This is about people doing their everyday activity and talking about bombing and shelling is as if it were everyday things that happen to them, and it was something which is to be it's become a part of their lives. So, and very interesting, I found this very interesting that he says that the siren is referred to as "there he goes." again, so the siren is referred to as the male sex. So his observations only in a way open a new doorway, and they don't necessarily create a sense of
he's very sensuous in that sense.
Very. That is true. He builds this kind of a character portrayal through these various characters who are coming in, and there's a clergyman who he speaks to, and in these conversations a kind of a web of life you can see, and people's and it's not something which is very serious or grave or anything. These people are just going on with their daily routines.
That's the dignity of the common people.
Right. They're going on with their daily lives, and at the same time, there is a memory. The clergyman will say, oh, I fought in this war. Oh, my nephew has just come from Dunkirk, etc. So, there is a kind of a life that is woven through narratives and through dialogues. And he mocks them, for constantly going back in time, but at the same time what comes across is this life that was being lived in 1940 when people were dealing with the war, and it wasn't like a tragedy, but how people were reacting to situations and how they were responding to life. I think that is what is important in these
holding one's nerve in very difficult times, and he does it so well.
Yes, and it's not just about
now I understand what is the connection between the wars and this person.
Right.
He takes them lightly, but at the same time very horrifying.
Right. It is very, what he's trying to suggest is something very horrifying. But in the conversations that he builds, in these narratives that he builds, they appear humorous and funny. And again, I think the reference to Charlie Chaplin is there, that because it is turned into a humorous thing, it appears to be more horrifying.
Yes.
Because this is not something, I mean, you laugh when you're reading all this, but then you realize that, oh my God, this is not something to be laughed at.
It's very, very unnerving.
Yes, that, that he says, and there is the character of the mother. She says that, oh, if the siren is going, then everything is well.
Imagine.
And then he's like, I didn't understand what she meant. She says, because bombs generally come without sirens. If there is a siren, which means everything is okay, bomb will come and get you. There'll be no siren, right? If a siren, so she says siren is a good thing, because then you know that everything is under control, right? And that we are safe. So, just the opposite. You would think siren means alert to danger. You know what I mean? That the hooting in the siren would mean that be alert, go to the safe areas, etc. There is a bomb threat. She says siren means no bomb threat, because when absence of siren means the bombs will get you. So I thought that it was a very different kind of reality that they were projecting, and it was coming from the lived experience. It was not something which was theoretical or idea oriented. In fact, these essays of Lynd, they are all very focused on the lived experience, of people around, and how they are talking about the situation. And when they speak from lived experience, there is a new insight, which is not conceptual, which is not theoretical, which is not coming from a philosopher, but coming from rather directly from life, and coming from the ordinary people, like the mother, the barber maid, or the barber, or the maid here, the clergyman, for instance. All these people form in a way, a group of common people who the writer then meets as he moves around in different places. So I think
would you call the essay in his hands as a kind of peculiar art form, which is highly communicative?
Yeah, I think it is a literary portrait. He builds a kind of a character portrait, which probably 19th century writers deliberately did, but he does so as a kind of. But when one has to remember, these are column articles, right, published in newspapers. So people already know there's not much background that is given, or there's not much framework provided. It just begins on the here and now. So I think there is a kind of immediacy, there's a kind of urgency, but at the same time, it's very particularly Lynd's essays are less contemplative and all sorts, and more focused, more dramatic maybe.
Would you like to say something about the language he uses?
Language again is used very, it's very dramatic. So there are lots of dialogues that you would find of people around him, and there is less of an intervention of the writer, right? The earlier kind of category which I mentioned, the 1930 category, is there he's only talking about himself. So they are more narratorial. right? He moves in a very narratorial space. But here, these kind of essays are very dramatic, wherein the style is again very conversational, because there are people talking how they talk every day, and he's capturing their dialogues in such essays, and then throwing a light on what he would think of such a person. Like he'd say that, oh, what I thought about this fearless man in No Fear, the essay, would be that I would admire such a person for being completely unafraid and picking up the bomb and throwing it in a place that is already damaged. But the magistrate obviously has a rule of one's own. So he gives his own take, but then leaves it there. Doesn't really try to tie the knots, or doesn't really try to give a kind of a moral at the end or anything. In fact, often he just leaves it at a question.
So, would you please sum it up and also give a short comment on the series with which you started?
So I think the English essay as a series is one of I think it has been a very interesting exercise, and I think this is not really done so much as a kind of a series. So the thing about the English essay that one needs to remember is that it always runs parallel to every other genre and every other form. It also runs parallel to the essay form as such, that was being written with a purpose, with a goal and an aim. The English essay is about life as it was lived at a particular point in time, and it had a kind of a very it had a corrective function, but it also held a mirror up to people's lives, showing what they were, how they were living, and picking up details from the ordinary lives of individuals, picking up details from the here and now, and at the same time picking up details of people as they walked or spoke, or what they read, what their mind was like. So in a way, it was using the popular mode to cultivate the sensibility of the period, not taking the literary canonical mode, but taking the popular mode, which would be the journal, newspapers, articles, periodicals, magazines that would be read, in the free time. So I think in a way it becomes the predecessor to what we might call popular literature. And it could very well become the basis for popular literature that becomes a proper discipline by the time you reach the 19th century and into the 20th century. I think it's the first form of popular literature, which meant, like Addison and Steele would say, read our paper when you're having your evening tea. So which meant that they are not expecting you to come focused and give them entire time and effort. They want to only merely entertain you, and entertain you with ideas that are fresh, which are forward looking, and at the same time that reflect the sensibility of the time.
So friends, we come to the end of the series, come to the end of discussion on Robert Lynd and with the 20th century. And Robert Lynd tells about the 20th century, that it's a century which belongs not to the high and mighty, not to the big philosophers of the past, but to the ordinary masses who want to strategize their conditions in such a manner that they can survive. So with this kind of a very positive note, we come to the end of Robert Lynd's discussion, and I'm sure you have enjoyed it, and you would be now motivated to in fact read some of the essays yourself and have your laughter in your privacy. So all the best to the viewers who have been a part of this discussion indirectly. And thank you, Richa Bajaj, for making it so very congenial, and
Thank you.
Thanks.